From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Sitting in tonight, Diane Sawyer.
Good evening. A new chance for diplomacy today. For weeks now, there has been a deadlock over a date when Secretary of State Baker would go to Baghdad to see Saddam Hussein. The Iraqis insisted on January 12th. The administration said no. If the meeting wasn't held by today, a new offer would be placed on the table. A new offer was placed on the table. The president says that Secretary of State Baker will be available next Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday to talk in Switzerland with Iraqi Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz. Our first report is from ABC's John McWethy.
The president told congressional leaders this morning that he was attempting to go the extra mile for peace by proposing the meeting next week in Geneva. But if Iraq says yes, it is not clear what Secretary Baker and Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz will have to talk about. So tough are U.S. conditions.
This offer is being made subject to the same conditions as the president's previous attempt. No negotiations, no compromises, no attempts at face saving, and no rewards for aggression.
U.S. officials say Baker would do little more than tell Aziz that the whole world demands Iraq withdraw. The secretary will carry a letter from President Bush to Saddam Hussein. Today, as Baker swore in the new U.S. ambassador to Kuwait, Edward Ganin, the secretary used some of his toughest language to date, saying the days of Iraq's occupation are numbered.
And so, as January 15 approaches, we are closer and closer to restoring Kuwait's sovereignty, whether by peace or whether by force.
Analysts say the proposed meeting between Baker and Aziz was considered necessary to convince Congress, the public, and governments in Europe and the Middle East that the Bush administration is still interested in a peaceful settlement. One skeptic, King Hussein of Jordan, who is in London today, praised the move.
This is a good step. A very important step at a critical time.
But House Armed Services Chairman Les Aspin, a Democrat, said he was disappointed.
The original Baker mission was sold as a way to cut through the cordon of sycophantic advisors that surrounded Saddam Hussein, to talk to him directly. And now what we're doing is meeting in Geneva with a sycophantic advisor.
On Iraqi television tonight, there was no mention of the U.S. initiative. It's not likely that the Iraqi people will be told that there is a new American proposal to talk until after Saddam Hussein has decided how to respond. There will be no public debate. John McWethy, ABC News, the State Department.
And the U.S. Secretary of State James Baker will talk with Sam Donaldson tonight on Primetime Live. Most of the congressional leaders who met with Mr. Bush this morning seemed pleased with the new initiative. But as ABC's Jim Wooten reports, they continued to debate what role Congress should play.
After their White House meeting, the Democrats uttered not a single word against a war in the Gulf, but merely argued, as they had inside, that if Mr. Bush does decide to pull the trigger, he must first have congressional permission.
The president holds a contrary view. I don't believe we persuaded him of our view, and I know he did not persuade us of his view.
Roughly translated, that means they simply agreed to disagree on a question of constitutional authority. Can the president, by himself, take the country into war? Back on Capitol Hill, as the new Congress formally convened,
the House will be in order.
The Senate will please come to order.
Rank-and-file Democrats like Harkin of Iowa and Adams of Washington argued with their own leadership, urging immediate debate on a presidential go-ahead.
Call it a declaration of war, call it a statutory authorization, call it what you want. It's a constitutional power, and that should be debated before January 15th.
The choice is, do we do it now?
Or later, asks Senator Mitchell, after Secretary Baker's meeting with the Iraqi foreign minister. And after a Capitol briefing today from Baker and Defense Secretary Cheney, the Democrats agreed to delay any formal debate until the Geneva session concludes, which doesn't bar individual Democrats from urging the president on their own to continue sanctions and defer an attack. And it didn't preclude several House Democrats from dropping Persian Gulf resolutions into the legislative hopper today, though they won't be argued on the floor anytime soon, if ever. The prospect of the Baker-Aziz talks has, for the moment at least, pretty much silenced the Congress. Jim Wooten, ABC News, Capitol Hill.
Public support for President Bush in this crisis remains strong. Our latest ABC News Washington Post poll shows 66% of those we asked approve of the way Mr. Bush is handling the situation. And 70% think Congress should be giving the president more support. As for military action, 65% say that the U.S. should go to war if necessary to force Iraq out of Kuwait. And 82% say the U.S. should move quickly within a month if the January 15th deadline is not met. If it comes to that, military planners agree that massive U.S. airstrikes would come first, some of them from bases that were little more than airstrips in the desert a few months ago. ABC's Bob Zelnick is in Saudi Arabia.
This F-15 Eagle belongs to one of 5 combat squadrons just relocated closer to the Iraqi border at this huge new base in Saudi Arabia.
The main advantage of being here is proximity to targets. While we certainly could hit targets from where we were before, we can do it now without the use of air refueling.
6 weeks ago, this was an unused Saudi airstrip. Then U.S. military engineers came in to build housing and other facilities for 2,000 pilots and airmen. The base is one of several Saudi facilities just opened to U.S. planes. Most were built by the Saudis in the event of an Israeli attack. When threats developed from other neighbors like Iran and Iraq, senior Air Force officials say the Saudis quietly invited the U.S. to pre-position weapons and equipment here.
In the 80s, we did a lot of pre-positioning of equipment into this theater, and as a result of that, it's made this job much simpler.
Sources say that by last August, the U.S. had enough equipment in Saudi Arabia to construct 16 tent air base communities. Weapons and fuel had also been stockpiled. Now, with the new bases open, the U.S. can attack Iraq from more than 30 locations, including aircraft carriers. With more than 1,000 planes available to strike Iraqi targets, few doubt the U.S. will quickly establish air superiority.
I think the skies are going to be clear in just a matter of days.
So important is U.S. air power that some military planners urge holding off the ground assault until they determine whether the air campaign alone can drive Iraq from the war. Bob Zelnick, ABC News, Saudi Arabia.
This other note on the Gulf, this morning Britain ordered 8 Iraqi embassy officials and 67 other Iraqis, mostly students, to leave the country. The Foreign Office said only that their continued presence was not conducive to the public good. When we come back, the makers of military boots and field rations. For them, the recession has simply gone away. The maker of the AIDS drug, AZT, its monopoly may be going away. And we'll meet Shoshonius, a goggle-eyed little creature who may have anthropologists rewriting their textbooks.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Brought to you by Just for...